Scene opens with sweeping drone shots of a majestic, well-preserved castle, transitioning to historical reenactments of knights jousting and a royal court. Hello, history buffs, and welcome back to our channel. When you think of medieval England, what comes to mind? Is it brave knights in shining armor, magnificent stone castles, or powerful kings and queens wearing jeweled crowns? Well, you're not wrong, but that's only a tiny piece of a much larger, more complex puzzle. Today, we pulling back the heavy velvet curtains of time to explore what life was really like in medieval England, from the highest lord in his castle to the humblest peasant in the fields. So, grab your tankard of Alor, a cup of tea, and let's journey back to a time of chivalry, conflict, and immense change. The medieval period, or the Middle Ages, in England stretches roughly from the Norman conquest in 1066 to the end of the Wars of the Roses in 1485. That's over 400 years of history. It was a world structured by a rigid social hierarchy known as the feudal system. Imagine a pyramid. At the very top sat the king. All the land in the kingdom technically belonged to him. Just below him were the powerful barons and high-ranking clergy, like bishops. The king granted them large chunks of land, called fiefs, in exchange for their loyalty, money, and, most importantly, military service. These barons, in turn, granted smaller parcels of their land to knights. And this is where our iconic medieval warrior comes in. The knight wasn't just a random soldier, he was a vassal, a sworn man to his lord. His primary duty was to fight for his lord and king when called upon, for a set number of days a year, usually about 40. Becoming a knight was a long, arduous process. A boy would start as a page in a noble household around the age of 7, learning courtly manners, music, and basic combat. Around 14, he'd become a squire, serving a knight directly. He'd be responsible for his knight's armor, weapons, and horse, following him into battle, and learning the art of war firsthand. If he proved himself worthy, he would be dubbed a knight in his early 20s in a solemn ceremony. It was a huge honor, a ticket to nobility and land. But a knight's life wasn't all glorious tournaments and rescuing damsels. Warfare was brutal, and the armor, while protective, was incredibly heavy and cumbersome. A full suit of plate armor could weigh over 50 pounds, and let's not forget the cost. A warhorse, armor, and weapons were astronomically expensive, the medieval equivalent of a luxury sports car. This is why only the wealthy could afford to be knights. Now, where did these knights and lords live? In castles, of course. But early medieval castles weren't the sprawling stone fortresses we see today. The first ones, built by William the Conqueror and his Normans, were called motte and bailey castles. Imagine a large earthen mound, the motte, with a wooden tower, or keep, on top. This was connected to a larger enclosed area, the bailey, which housed stables, barracks, and workshops, all protected by a wooden palisade and a ditch. They were quick and cheap to build, perfect for a conquering army to establish control. Over time, as building techniques improved and the threat of attack became more sophisticated, wood gave way to stone, castles became symbols of power and formidable defensive structures. We start to see the classic features: towering curtain walls, imposing gatehouses with heavy portcullises, and arrow slits for archers. The heart of the castle was the Great Hall. This was the social center, where the lord and his household would eat, entertain guests, and conduct business. Life inside a castle could be crowded, cold, and smoky. Privacy was a luxury few enjoyed. The grand tapestries we often see weren't just for decoration. They provided crucial insulation against the damp, drafty stone walls. It was a world of stark contrasts, grand feasts in the hall, while just outside the walls, life was very, very different. That brings us to the base of our pyramid, the peasantry. They made up over 90% of the population. The vast majority were serfs or villains who were tied to the land. They weren't slaves who could be bought and sold, but they weren't free either. They couldn't leave their manor, marry, or even have their grain ground into flour without the Lord's permission. In exchange for a small strip of land to farm for their own family, they had to work on the Lord's land, the domain, for several days a week. They also paid taxes or dues, often in the form of crops, livestock, or products like eggs and honey. Life for a peasant was a relentless cycle of hard physical labor dictated by the changing seasons. Spring was for plowing and planting, summer for haymaking and harvesting, and autumn for threshing and preparing for winter. They lived in small, simple houses, often just 1 or 2 rooms, with wattle and daub walls, thatched roofs, and earthen floors. The whole family, sometimes including their animals, would huddle together for warmth in the winter. Their diet was basic and monotonous: dark rye bread, a thick vegetable stew called pottage, and small beer, which was safer to drink than water. Meat was a rare treat, usually only on feast days. Life was precarious. A bad harvest could mean starvation, and disease was a constant threat. The average life expectancy was brutally short, maybe around 35 years old. However, it's a mistake to think of the entire medieval period as static. Life changed, especially after the Black Death. This devastating plague swept through England in the mid-14th century, wiping out an estimated third to a half of the population. It was a catastrophic event, but it had an unexpected consequence. Suddenly, there was a massive labor shortage. The peasants who survived found themselves in a position of power. They could demand higher wages and better conditions. Many serfs abandoned their manors for towns, seeking freedom and new opportunities. The old feudal system began to crumble, and what about the towns and cities? They were bustling, crowded, and often filthy places, but they were also centers of freedom and opportunity. A saying went, "Town air makes you free." If a serf could escape to a town and remain there for a year and a day without being caught, he was a free man. Towns were hubs of trade and craft. Here you'd find skilled artisans, bakers, blacksmiths, weavers, and carpenters organized into powerful guilds. These guilds controlled the quality of goods, set prices, and trained apprentices, ensuring their members' prosperity and protecting their trade. The rise of this merchant class created a new source of wealth and power, one based not on land, but on money. At the very top of it all, overseeing this entire structure, was the monarch. The king or queen's power was immense, believed to be granted by God, the divine right of kings. They were the ultimate lawmaker, the supreme judge, and the commander-in-chief of the army. But their power wasn't absolute. They were expected to rule justly and consult with their council of great lords and bishops. If a king became a tyrant, like King John, the barons could, and did, rise up against him, forcing him to sign the Magna Carta in 1215. This landmark document established the principle that everyone, including the king, was subject to the law. It was a foundational step towards modern democracy. Life in medieval England was a rich tapestry woven from threads of power, duty, faith, and survival. It was a world where a knight-esque code of chivalry existed alongside the brutal reality of war, where the grandeur of a castle stood in stark contrast to the poverty of a peasant-esque hut, and where the authority of the crown was constantly being negotiated and challenged. It was far from the fairy tale we often imagine, but in its complexity and its struggles, we find the roots of the world we live in today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. I hope it gave you a new perspective on medieval life. What part of this era fascinates you the most? The knights, the castles, or the daily life of the common person? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. We'll see you in the next one.